Hello again, everybody. This is the John D. Healy podcast, aka It's Good to Talk, because it really is good to talk. This might not be John D. Healy doing the intro, but we're going to be looking at, and that's how it all started, we're going to be looking at a few stories from the book. This is part 3, so if you want to see the other 2 and this is your first one, you could always go back and see part 1 and part 2 to get caught up. However, either way, we're going to be looking at the adventures of Stoney McGurrin in his autobiography produced by John. And if you like it, make sure that you give it a like and subscribe if you haven't done so by now. And as always, this video is brought to you by Liffey Van Lines. If you need help moving, then let Liffey do the lifting. If you want to get a copy of the book, and that's how it all started, or an audiobook, there'll be a link in the description and you could easily click there and go get yourself your own copy. But without further ado, let's get into part 3, and that's how it all started.
Village people, not like home. At work, Desmond met an American-born guy named Murphy, and every weekend Murphy took him to all the places he knew. Desmond lost the Irish accent. On occasion, all 3 of us went together to different places on the weekend. One time we went to the West Village. Murphy got talking to an older guy, well-dressed, well-spoken. He told a story about President Wilson in the 1920s. When a president visits a city, there's a spokesman for the party, and he told us that Wilson once came to Madison Square Garden, which at that time was on 24th Street on Madison Avenue. The spokesman for the party was Chauncey Depew. He introduced Wilson by saying, "And now I give you a man who is pregnant with the milk of human kindness." Wilson thanked him for his kind introduction and said, "If it's a boy, I'll call it George Washington. If it's a girl, I'll call it Martha Washington. But if it's wind, like I think it is, I'll call it Chauncey Depew." The older guy bought us beer for hours. I needed to use the bathroom, and he said to me, "Don't use the bathrooms in here. They're very dirty. I'll buy 3 6-packs, and all of you come up to my apartment. I live across the street." Desmond and I are a little afraid to go, but Murphy is the New Yorker. He has no problem. He winks at us, slapped the man on the back, and said, "Let's go!" Murphy and him carrying the beer. We get up to his apartment, and I'm busting to go to the bathroom, but I'm too nervous to say anything. He says the place is a mess. Give him a minute. Murphy is drinking a beer with a smile on his face, as if he knows what's happening. The guy goes into the bathroom and comes out with a pile of old newspapers, which he lays out on a section of the living room floor. He goes into the bathroom again and comes out completely in the nude, goes down on all 4s and says, "Please, please, boys, piss on me." I think Desmond was like me. We were shocked. Murphy, with a big smile, says, "The man bought us the beer, so let's piss." Murphy had no problem. I was so nervous that it took me a while to get started, but then I couldn't stop. The guy rolled around until we were finished. Murphy shouts, "The show is over!" and grabs all the beer and we leave. Down on the street, Murphy says, "How do you guys like New York?" Cars and Boys, 1961 Dodge. We had a party at our apartment at 9432 114th Street off Atlantic Avenue. Aunt Catherine, who lived 5 blocks away on 112th Street and Liberty Avenue, was at the party. She said that she was so used to a full house that it was strange now having it so quiet. The McGurrins and her 2 daughters, Geraldine and Bebe, her son Huey, and her late husband Michael, all gone. Desmond asked her if she would be interested in renting a room. She said, "I'd love to. I'll charge you $15 a week. Is that okay?" "Yes, ma'am." She said, "I have a 17-year-old godchild, Brian, there now. It will be nice to have extra company." Deal done. I bought a 1959 Chevy Impala convertible that was bright red with a white top and red upholstery. The guy I bought it from was a mechanic and he needed the money. He told me that he had had it souped up and that he had put a big engine in it. He had taken out the automatic transmission and put in a 4-speed transmission with a gear stick on the floor. He said all it needed was a big rear-end axle, what he called a 411 rear end, to match the power of the car. We asked Aunt Catherine if we could use her garage because we could do this ourselves, and she said yes. We went to the junkyard and found a big 411, and we put it in the car. The car was so fast it could do 60 miles per hour in first gear. Forever after that, if Desmond saw a girl with a big ass, he would say, "Now there goes a 411 rear end." A few weeks went by and Desmond got a call from his first cousin in White Plains, who was a car dealer, telling him that he had a 1961 Dodge, like new. "Don't let it go," his cousin said. "Give me your address and I will have the paperwork ready and you can drive it home." The following Saturday, we took a train at Grand Central Terminal to White Plains. The car was ready. We stayed for dinner with Desmond's aunt. We left her house late and decided to stop in the Bronx to meet Jimmy Cullen, also from home. Jimmy decided to come to Queens and visit my mother since he hadn't seen her in years. We were on the Van Wyck Expressway, the three of us in front. Back then, cars had a long seat in the front called a bench seat. And we get off at Atlantic Avenue and made a right turn. This car, with three guys in it, comes up on the right side of us. The guy in the back seat has his window down, and so does the driver, and they're screaming at us. They go forward and wait for us to go forward, again and again, for 10 blocks. I'm in the middle. I say to Jimmy, "Turn the window down." Jimmy turns it down. I yell out to the guys, "Do you want us to pull over?" "Yes, you homosexuals!" We found out later some people thought that if three guys sat in the front of the car together, they must be gay. So we were going to get a bad beating just because they thought we were gay. I yell, "If you want us over, ram us!" Desmond yells, My car, no! By now, we have reached 114th Street, and we make a left. The next turn is 111th Street, and I see their turn signal going on. I say, "They're turning around. They're going to get us." We park the car in front of my house, and we all jump out of the car, but they're already there. Desmond makes it to the trunk and pulls out the jack. I ask myself why, to this day. He throws it to me. I swing it at a guy, and he runs back to his car. Desmond yells my name. I turn and see lots of blood. Desmond has a guy in a headlock, but Desmond is the one who's covered in blood. He tells me to hit him, so I hit him on the head, and Desmond lets go. The driver in the car starts spinning rubber. I yank his door open and hit him in the ribs with a jack. Someone called the cops, and we could hear sirens, so we took off running. I ran across Atlantic Avenue into somebody's backyard. I was so exhausted that I lay there for 20 minutes. I came out to Atlantic Avenue and called my house from a public phone. Mother answered and said that there were a lot of sirens and police cars, and it sounded like somebody got killed outside. I said that I thought I did it. The phone went dead. I was told later that my sisters called our brother-in-law, Larry Griffin, a detective in the 75th Precinct. He drove in from Mineola to 114th Street. We told him Desmond's car was outside. He said they had traced the license plate to Aunt Catherine's address. "Let's go," he said to me. We went there, and there were 2 detectives there, and they were very pissed off. They wouldn't even talk to Griffin, but I noticed that Griffin kept talking. We knocked on the door, and Catherine's godchild, Brian, answered. He let us in, but the pissed-off detective said to Brian, "Desmond Fallon was here, and you wouldn't let me in." Brian had a lot of nerve. He had told them that they needed a search warrant to come in. He said that Desmond wasn't there, but they still needed a search warrant. Griffin saved us from getting arrested. The next day, we found out that nobody had died, but one guy had a fractured rib. Desmond went to Jamaica Hospital, and they gave him 7 stitches. Mother said to me, "I don't wish bad to any family, but I will gladly go to your funeral before I'd have you harm someone else, right or wrong. Let the other family worry about what their son did, but don't you harm anybody." That straightened me out. Now I knew where I stood. A month later, Desmond and I got letters. The guy was suing us. The driver of the car was named Simon, and he was 24 and married. We couldn't believe it. Married men, out at night, looking for and making trouble. They should be under their father's care themselves. We showed the letters to Larry. He read them and said, "There's something they missed. Let it go a few weeks, and I'll stop by their house." A few weeks later, Larry stopped by. He said he didn't think I'd be hearing from Simon or his pals. He said he went to Simon's house and he asked him in. Larry told him it was a routine call, that he needed to hear the circumstances of how it started. Simon said they were on their way home when a car started to bump them. They tried to get away by going down a street. Larry says, "You say they followed you, but how did you all finish up outside of 9432 114th Street, Stoney McGurrin's home?" "Simon, your story is false. No case." Luck was on our side. On another night, Fallon and I drove to the Bronx to the Red Mill Dance Hall on 168th Street at Jerome Avenue. We met no girls, but we did meet two brothers, Mike and Johnny Carty, and their roommate, Pete McGrath from Scotland. McGrath was a boxer, and he must have been pretty good. He was doing 10 rounds in Madison Square Garden. He fought under the name Scott McGrath. He was a little guy who fought bantamweight and drove a white Cadillac. He thought that he was hot stuff. Mike Carty was the guy who should feel like hot stuff. He was 6'1" and slim as a branding iron. All the guys would ask a girl to dance, and one after another, they would get turned down. Mike Carty would fix his tie and walk over, and the girl or girls would jump up every time. One Thursday night, Mike Carty, McGrath, and I went to the Lorelei Dance Hall on 86th Street, in an area known as Germantown. Thursday night was the night. All the girls from Germany, England, Ireland, Scotland, etc. were off work. I had heard guys joking about it. They called it Kitchen Mechanics Night Out. The three of us were at the bar. The band started playing. McGrath saw this tall blonde and he asked her to dance. She nodded yes. The music was so loud you couldn't talk. When the dance was over, McGrath pointed to the bar. "Will you have a drink?" She nodded. He was so happy to be with this tall blonde. He ordered a drink and introduced her to Mike and me, asking her name with a Scottish accent. She asked him, "Are you from Scotland?" "Yes," he said. "Goodbye," she said. He said, "What's wrong?" She said, "I didn't come 3,000 miles to meet you. I could have met the likes of you back home." We should have had Desmond with us. He didn't want to meet Irish girls, and she didn't want to meet Scottish guys. We all got called up for the army within a year of one another, and we all failed, except Desmond. I was so surprised. I knew why I failed, because of my arm. Desmond was called for the army, but he had other options. When you got called for the armed forces, you could choose to join whichever service you liked. Desmond said the army was a bunch of pussies and that he was joining the Marines. He did 11 weeks in Parris Island, South Carolina. He told us the top guys from the sergeant on up were all Southerners. There was one black guy in his outfit. The first day, the sergeant told the black man to stand up front where he could keep an eye on him. Every day the black man was leading the pack for 9 weeks. I forgot to mention that for 11 weeks they had no radio, no TV, no contact with the outside world. One afternoon the sergeant called a halt. He marched all the way up front, turned and faced the black guy, clicked his heels, pointed his finger into the black man's face and yelled, "You! Back of the line! Your friend just got shot!" For the next 2 weeks, the black guy was at the back. When the 11 weeks were over, they got off base to find out that the sergeant had a radio, so he knew that President Kennedy had been shot. Desmond never wore the uniform when he was out on leave, and he didn't like anyone who did. One night we were all at the bar in the Red Mill Ballroom, and Joe Ford walked in uniform. He was in the Army. Joe was a nice guy. He had no airs and graces to him, but Desmond had to start. He said, "Look at the pussy in an Army uniform." Then he saw the medal on Joe's lapel. He reached over and flipped it and asked Joe what it was for. Joe, in a nice tone of voice, said that it was for sharpshooting. Desmond asked, "What is the distance for sharpshooting in the Army?" Joe said, 150 yards. "We in the Marines call that the John Wayne course," says Fallon. Mick Carty said that Desmond was so insulting that he was funny. Desmond didn't like the Marines that much, so he went into the reserves. He had to go away 2 or 3 weeks at a time, twice a year. He and I got a 2-bedroom apartment on Union Street in Flushing. He got a refrigeration air conditioning job on Bleecker Street in the West Village. Union Street was not a good neighborhood. There were 2 bars, Shannon's bar, mostly black, and the Chestnut, which was mostly white. There were a lot of bad white kids hanging around and watching everything. We lived over a not-too-fancy supermarket. There were 4 apartments. You went up one side of the supermarket for 2 apartments, front and back, and you went up the other side for the other 2 apartments, front and back. We got to know a guy named Neil Mann, who had just joined the NYPD. He lived in the back apartment on the left side. We lived in the front apartment on the right side. They were all 2 bedrooms with kitchens that had a fridge just inside the front door. A woman with 2 kids lived in the back apartment on our side. She let us know when she was leaving, and she would leave it open so we could use it as a shortcut to go and see each other. We had very little, but we had a TV. Neil had a hi-fi, but no TV. We asked Neil if we could run speaker wire from his hi-fi to a speaker in our apartment, and we would hide the speaker in the ceiling. When we would put on his long-playing records, our visitors wouldn't know where the music was coming from. The police department rules were that for the first 6 months after you join, you have to stay home, but when they called you, you had better answer. Neil, having no TV, would come through the empty apartment to see us and ask to watch TV. We also ran a 50-foot wire from his phone jack to our apartment so that he could answer his phone when he was watching TV. One Saturday night, we asked him if he would take a chance on leaving and come out with us. He said it was not worth it, and could he stay there and watch TV. We said sure, and left. We didn't get back until 4 a.m. In the hallway there were 2 doors with glass. First door, glass and lock broken. Second door, glass and lock broken. I said, "Desmond, we are screwed. Plus, our TV is probably gone." We get to the top of the stairs and see our apartment door is open and the lock is broken. The lights are on. Neil is asleep on the couch with his gun in his hand. Desmond was great for telling somebody else what to do. He said to me, "You wake him." I said, "What happens if he wakes up shooting?" Anyway, I thought it was safe, so I got the broom and stood off to the side and started shouting his name and pushing him with the broom until he woke up. He tells us, "You guys were gone for no more than 10 minutes. I heard the door bang downstairs. I think it's you guys coming back. You forgot something." Then I heard the second door. Then I get up with a gun. They then started on the apartment door. Now I know it's not you, so I put my elbow on top of the fridge with a gun pointed straight at the door, 2 feet away. The door gives, and there they are. Their faces went a lot whiter than they were. I grabbed the closest one to the top of the stairs, so the other guy can't get down. I was really going to put a scare into them. I could tell on their faces that they couldn't figure out how I was in there. I have the one guy by the throat, and I pushed him up against the wall. The other guy is bleeding, and the gun went off. I looked down, and the bullet went through the toe of his shoe. I got scared, but I didn't show it. I lifted him with a push. I didn't mean to, but he went tumbling down the stairs. I said to the other guy, "You too." And didn't the other guy fall down the stairs also? He told us for the first 6 months, and always for that matter, you've got to account for your bullets. You can always say that you lost one, but he's a little worried that the bullet hit a water line. He asks me to go down to Esser, the owner of the supermarket, in the morning and see if there's a water leak. 9:30 the next morning, I walk in, get milk, bacon, and eggs. I go up and down every aisle. No water. But I can't go in the back. I come up to the register and Esser starts ringing. I tell him that we came home this morning and the bathtub was full, but I don't think any water came down to you. Esser stops ringing up the money, which is hard for a Jewish man. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Where? Where? Come with me!" He took me everywhere. I said, "I told you, Esser, that we caught it in time." I come upstairs and tell Neil, "Okay, no leak, and we're okay." Drop dead. We started going to the Chestnut Bar. The bartender, Tommy, was in his 60s. He was 6'3", with a big head of gray hair, and he was like a big teddy bear. He never said an angry word. We had heard that some woman owned the bar, and occasionally a woman came in and was very abusive to him. Later we found out that we hadn't yet met the owner, and that the abusive lady was Tommy's wife. They lived around the corner. On Sundays, bars did not open until 1 p.m., but Tommy would come to work at 9 a.m. to get away from his wife. We were there one Sunday at 10 a.m. plus another 15 people. She stormed in and ranted and raved for 15 to 20 minutes. Even the customers were getting tired. When she left, she had to pass a window. As the door closed, Tommy said, not too loud, "Drop dead." As she passed the window, her head went down. We all knew something happened. We went out, and there was no movement. She was dead as a doornail. "There you go, Tommy. You got your wish." We went to the wake. We felt very funny saying sorry for your trouble. Gay in the 60s. What? Desmond started working for an air conditioning company on Bleecker Street in the West Village. He was there only a short time when he was given a job on the air conditioner system in a doctor's office. Everything the doctor wants, he does. The doctor is friendly and asks Desmond why he's not in the armed forces. Desmond tells him that he was in the Marines and is now in the reserves. The doctor says, "Bet you would like to get out of the reserves." "You bet," says Desmond. "Well," the doctor says, "I'm a doctor for the Marines and I can help you with that. Get me all your paperwork for your time in the Marines and I'll arrange it from there." The job was finished and a month went by when Desmond got a call from the doctor's office. He met the doctor. "Sign here and you are out." How lucky can a guy be? That was the best air conditioner job ever. Back in the 60s, a lot of people knew very little about gays and nothing about transvestites. Desmond was getting an education driving around the village, fixing air conditioners, beer boxes, and ice machines in all those gay and transvestite clubs. Some weekends, he was on emergency call duty. You had to leave a number where you could be reached. You could get a call at 1 or 2 in the morning, and off you went. He talked about one club on Jones Street off 7th Avenue. It was one of the weirdest. On his first Saturday night, he got a call at 3 a.m. He had never seen so many tall girls, and when he walked in, they crowded around him saying, "You look so hot, baby. Make our beer cold." He had to go behind the bar to fix the beer system. That's when the bartender, who looked normal but was probably gay, told him that the girls were all men. It was an eye-opener. Desmond's mother in Ireland wasn't feeling well. He decided to go visit and stay a few days in Leitrim and a few days in Dublin, where his brother, Shammy, was in the insurance business. When he came back, he told me that Shammy's girlfriend was a school teacher, and her friend Lisa was an airline stewardess. Lisa flew the Dublin to Paris route, but she was going to be transferred to Dublin to New York. He told me he gave her his phone number. A month later, she called and told him what hotel she was staying at. It was Saturday night. He said to me that he didn't know where to take her. I told him that I had no date, so we'll both take her. We'll give her an experience on her first weekend in New York. We'll go to a few half-normal places first, and then to Jones Street. We got to Jones Street about 1 a.m., and the joint was jumpin'. Desmond didn't dance, so I asked her out on the floor. She was staring at all those beautiful women, and she said to me that she had never seen so many beautiful girls. "Yes," I said, "they are beauties." When the music stopped, we went back to the bar and she asked to go to the bathroom. I said to the bartender, "Where is the bathroom?" He pointed to the dance floor and around to the right. Off she went. After about 5 minutes, she came running back. She said, "There's only one toilet bowl and I'm waiting." Then a voice says, "I'll be right out, honey." And the door opens. She had her dress over her shoulders. She had a big belt around her stomach, and she was tying up the biggest wing-wang between her legs. I said, "Kidding. You can go back now. She's gone." She said, "I'm too scared to pee." Desmond spoke to the bartender, and he took her inside the bar and downstairs to the house toilet. I never met her again, but I'd have loved to hear her tell the story of a 20-year-old girl's first night in New York City. Desmond and I loved to watch the Saturday night fights on TV. He had a cousin bartending on 2nd Avenue and 90th Street. One night we drove in Desmond's car and found a parking spot on 91st Street at 1st Avenue. We went to see the fight. As we're going back to the car, we make the turn off 2nd Avenue on 91st Street and see a large crowd of black people going towards 1st Avenue. We have suits on. A little kid comes running up the block. He says, "Are you guys cops?" I said, "What's wrong?" He said that crowd of blacks searched him and took his only 50 cents. I gave him $1 and said, "You're okay now, kid. We'll take care of it." The kid ran off. We kept going towards the car. The crowd turned and started towards us. Desmond said, "Let's go back." I said, "Never trouble trouble until trouble troubles you. Why should they bother us?" Desmond said, "You and your damn rhymes. They bothered the kid. I'm going back." When we got back to 2nd Avenue, we looked back. The crowd had turned and was going back the way they had come. Our car was at the end of the block, and we decided to go back down. We got halfway. We saw a white couple on some steps in a doorway. The crowd had turned again. Now I got scared. I said we should go back, but Desmond wanted to run to where the white couple was. But when we get there, there's no couple. I think they lived there and they had run to their apartment. Now we're in the hallway. It was a long hallway with the stairs in the back. We ran back to the stairs and turned when we got there. Desmond put his hand in his back pocket like he had a gun, but the first guy said, "If you had a gun, you'd have used it." They kept coming at us on the stairs. Only 5 of the crowd had come in. Desmond and I grab hands. We're kicking at them, but they push us up half a flight. There's a window where we are, and we're still kicking. But they push us to the landing, and now they're at the window. One of them has gloves on, and he smashes the window and pulls out some broken glass and sends it flying into Desmond. We are still holding hands and kicking. I look over and see 6 empty Coca-Cola bottles. I break loose from Desmond and run for the bottles. He doesn't know what's on my mind, and he's screaming, "Don't leave me!" I grab 2 bottles and throw them to him. I couldn't believe that he caught them. I grabbed 2 more. We broke them on the floor and went after them. The crowd took off. We went up to the roof and went over 3 buildings and then came down to the street. When we got down, the cops were there. There was an Irish woman on the steps and a black cop. She said to us, "What are you doing around here? It's a very bad neighborhood. Are you okay?" We were lucky it was winter. Desmond takes off his coat and his jacket, pulls up his shirt, and the glass has gone through them all into his stomach. The black cop, quite nice man, looks at the cut, says, "You need to go to the hospital." But leave it to Desmond for an insult. He points to the cut, looks at the cop, and says, "Black folks did this." We decided that I would drive to Bellevue Hospital on 26th Street and 1st Avenue. We get there and the doctors say they must operate right away. There's glass in the blood and it will move through to the heart if it isn't stopped. I said I'm going to the dance. I don't know what I did, but when I came back at 7 a.m. Sunday morning, Desmond was sharing a room with an old man who had no chin and spit and blood coming from his mouth. A young Irish nurse comes in and Desmond asks her to pull the curtain. She says no. He says, "I'm not going to be here and look at that. I'm sick enough." She says that if you weren't out there getting in trouble, you wouldn't have to be in here. He grabs the cord you pull when you need assistance, yanks and yanks on it. 2 nurses come in and he says, "I want the doctor." He had such a forceful way that you had to admire him. He gets the doctor. He explains his case, that the nurse was more concerned with getting her way than with the patient. "I want those curtains pulled, and I don't want to see her again while I'm here." The doctor says, "Yes, Mr. Fallon." Fallon used to say some Irish nurses could be the worst when they came to work with a hangover. If you were to listen to Desmond, he didn't like Irish girls or Ireland, but it's amazing what can happen. He met an Irish girl who was an only child. Her father owned a dairy farm and wanted a man to marry the daughter and manage the farm. Desmond and she got married and went back to her village in Kerry called Knocknagoshel. They ran the farm, had a bunch of kids, and never left. I visited him there in 2016. It was 50 years since we met. He didn't recognize me, but he hadn't changed. I had to pick him out of a crowd in Times Square. It must be the country air. Keeping cool in the big city. After refrigeration and air conditioning school, my first job was with Fagaria Air Conditioning Company in Manhattan. All they did were window units. They hired extra people for the summer and fired them all in the winter. I always considered myself not too bright, so I never liked being in charge, but I was a little nervous of the guy that I was working with. Our bosses didn't seem to care. One day on Park Avenue and 50th Street, 18 stories up, we were putting an air conditioning unit in a window. After we lifted into the window, he told me to move aside, so I did. He went to straighten the unit, and off it went. We watched as it hit the sidewalk. It missed everybody. One guy by 5 feet. I couldn't believe it. A few people looked up and then kept going. A few weeks later, he dropped a screwdriver on Madison Avenue and lucked out again. The company put a phony ad in the paper to get customers through the door. I was off that detail within a month. It was a $12 special, and 90% of the time, the people didn't need anything done. They had me working very late one Saturday. At 9 p.m., I was told to go to an apartment on 88th Street and West End Avenue. A Jewish family was having a party for friends, and I was going to work on the air conditioner in the bedroom. The brother and sister, both in their 20s, came in and closed the door and started arguing, ignoring me as if I wasn't there. The sister said the brother invited one guest more than she did, and she had bought extra food, so he owed her 50 cents for one thing, 50 cents for another, and 75 cents for another. Up to that point in my life, I could never imagine family members being like that, but a Jewish friend told me later, "This is good teaching for the business world." I worked for 3 more air conditioning companies, but they all wanted experienced people. Then I went for an interview at HO Refrigeration. HO stands for Harry Odilon. I told him, I just came out of school and I have no experience. Harry said, "Well, I like young guys that I can train my way." I worked for Harry for 2 years. He worked only on big commercial stuff, and he was also a licensed electrician. I was always with Harry, piping in new jobs and troubleshooting old ones. One day, Harry said, "My top mechanic can't find the trouble on a 50-ton air conditioner. Let's see what you and I can do." There was this very large compressor in a basement. The basement was wet, except for one spot. Harry was working on the compressor for an hour when he came up with this idea. The compressor had a high side and a low side. The high side was discharge and the low side was suction. Harry turned the electric switch off, took the plug out of the suction side, and got a bucket. He told me to hold the bucket under the hole in the suction side in case there was a drip. Then he went over and threw the switch. The hot oil hit me with such force that it lifted me and threw me 6 feet across the basement. When I got the oil out of my eyes, there was Harry on the dry part of the basement floor, laying down with his feet in the air laughing. 2 weeks later, all my hair started falling out. A few guys told me I should sue. I talked to Mother and she said, "Oh my God, why would you even think of such a thing? Harry is so good to you, teaching you a trade and giving you work summer and winter. Don't ever talk like that again." My hair did grow back, but not like it was before. Mother said that you can live without hair, and I did. Harry had a deal with the city housing department. The inspector would meet Harry and give him addresses for apartments that they thought might have fire hazards. I never did find out how the city knew. Harry and I would knock on the door and tell the people we were there to disconnect their electricity. They would be upset, but Harry would disconnect. One morning, as usual, we met the inspector. He gave us 3 addresses. It was 10 a.m., and Harry knocked on a door, and the door was open. Harry talked loud. He shouted, "We're from the city! We have to shut off your electricity!" It was a railroad flat. A voice shouted, "In here, in the back!" The first thing we saw was an electrical cord going from the front room into the next room. 2 more cords plugged into that one, and on it went into the back room. And there was this tall black man sitting on a stool with a box of chicken on the floor watching TV. No furniture that I could see. Harry says it again. "We're here from the city to disconnect your electricity." This man looks straight at Harry and says, "Every man's home is his castle. Now this may look like a shithole to you, but it's my castle, and you and nobody else is going to turn off my TV show." He leans down and picks up a big kitchen knife and goes to stand up. That's when I took off, but Harry had taken off also. We got so scared that we didn't see each other, and it looked like a Laurel and Hardy scene when we both got stuck in the door. That afternoon, we meet the inspector. Harry hands him the card back and says, "Here's one for you to disconnect." I said to Harry, "You've got to admire that man. The poor man has nothing but his TV, and we were going to take that away. He scared us enough." Now he has his TV. Good for him. Harry came to like me so much that he brought me to his home in Flatlands, Brooklyn several times. I didn't know it at the time, but he wanted me to meet his daughter, who was beautiful and smart. She was 1 year older than me, but I couldn't see me with her, and I'm sure that she felt the same way. As work went on with Harry, I also learned electrical and plumbing. One day, he gave me an address in Astoria, Queens. He said he'd meet me there. I got lost and could not find it. When I got there, he went crazy and fired me. I said to him, "All my tools are in the truck." He said, "You leave everything here." I said, "No, you can pick your truck up in front of my house." And I jumped into the truck and took off, with him following me. But I got lost. He got lucky when a police car came towards me. He got the police to stop me and had me put all my tools out on the sidewalk. He locked up his truck and left me there. I hailed a cab, put all my tools in the trunk, and went home. I never saw Harry again. A working man. I went to all the Irish bars and got a lot of work repairing air conditioners, beer boxes, and ice machines, and I signed up about 12 yearly contracts. But come winter, it wasn't enough. I met a guy, Tom Kelly, who worked for his brother, who owned a fleet of yellow cabs. He told me that I should get a cab license and drive a cab whenever I want, and also stay with the air conditioning. I went for the test, which I thought was of no use. I remember 2 of the questions. How do you go from the Port of Authority to Small Paradise? And what street goes river to river but doesn't go through? I drove from 4 p.m. until 6 a.m. My first day, I picked up a skinny little man at 87th Street and 3rd Avenue. He got into the cab and said, "Aqueduct Racetrack." I instantly said, "Do you know the way?" He yelled, "Stop the cab! Stop the cab! My day is fucked! My luck is gone! A cab driver who doesn't know where he's going!" He jumped out and ran up 3rd Avenue. I made the same mistake a few more times, and then I came up with a line that worked. I came to realize that 90% of passengers knew where they were going. All I needed was to rephrase my words when they would tell me where. I would say, "Is it okay for you to call the turns, and I'll make them?" "Absolutely, driver." A lot of the time, they would say they liked the driver to go their way anyway. Tom Kelly and I became good friends. He told me he used to drive a tractor-trailer. He said his wife made him give it up, but he still missed it. I told him, "I don't know what it is, but come every spring I get this urge to see America, and I don't think I'll have peace of mind if I don't do it and get it over with." "Well," said Tom, "you get yourself into furniture moving, and you will find yourself in all of the states." I stayed in refrigeration. One night I was at a dance at the Jaeger house. I asked this girl to dance. We got on the floor and the conversation was good. I asked her to have a drink. She asked to look at my hand. She said, "Why are your nails so dirty?" I said, "I'm a refrigeration mechanic and it's hard to get all the dirt out from under the nails." She said, "What makes you think that I would take you home and let you use them on my pussy? No, thank you." And she walked away. The following Monday, I went to see Tom Kelly. "Tom, how do I get into the trucking business?" He said, "You'll never run out of work, so I recommend you buy trucking." He seemed to know everything. He made a phone call, and the next day he and I were in Comic, Long Island. I put $3,000 down on a Ford cab with a Caterpillar engine. I drove it off the lot into his backyard, but I had moved too fast. I discovered that in New York State you need a number 1 license to drive a tractor-trailer, and I didn't have one. Tom said, "You know Black Willie, the mechanic in the cab garage? Talk to him." I explained my predicament to Willie, and he told me that he knew a guy in Jersey, and that 1 license covers all vehicles there, but you need a Jersey address. I said I knew a family, the Gallaghers, and that I would call them. I knew them well in the past. They were thrilled to hear from me. They all said, "Of course, use our address." I told Willie I got a Jersey address, and he told me, when I came in with the cab the next morning, to wait around for him to get off at 7 a.m., and that he and I would drive to Newark together. On the way out, Willie told me, "It's been so long, I hope I know what he looks like." I was a little worried, but I said nothing. We drive into the parking lot of the motor vehicle department and park. Cars are coming and going. Finally, a white car comes in and a man gets out. Willie says, "I think that's him," and gets out of the car. He walks over and they talk for a while, then they shake hands. Willie waves to me to come over and I go over and say hello. The instructor hands me a piece of paper with 20 questions and answers and tells me that he has to take a girl for a test. "I'll be a half hour. You memorize all of these." I sit in the car and say them over and over until he got back. He says to me, "You got them all?" I say, "I hope." He says, "Don't worry. You've got $35? I hand him $35. By now, there's a line outdoors going inside. He stands with me all the way to the door, and he gets the attention of a guy tapping me on the top of the head. "Now," he says, "the guy inside the door will give you a form with all the questions. You answer the ones you're sure of and sign the paper. Just make sure you go to that guy." I fill out the paper and go to the guy. He was an Irishman. He takes the paper and tells me to go for the eye test, and then leave. 4 days later, Mary Gallagher called me. "For you. He's one of the black men who have been working with you all week, Jimmy Reese. You, Jimmy, and I go into the office. Jimmy gets to know what he gets paid. You get to know what you get. You pay for all the diesel, the tires, road tax, insurance. I have my own insurance company, and I'll give you a deal." He says, "We don't have the rights to go all the way to California. You've got to go to Atlanta, Georgia, and pick up papers at Rocky Ford Van Lines, and those papers will allow you to travel to California legally." Jimmy and I headed out. Our first stop was a truck stop in Maryland. When we got out of the truck, Jimmy says, "You diesel up and have coffee. I'm going to call my cousins and tell them I'm coming." I did all that and waited in the truck. 20 minutes later, here comes Jimmy. The next morning, we were in South Carolina, and Jimmy does the same thing. He says, "Diesel up and eat. I've got to tell my cousins where I am." The next stop is a run-down truck stop outside of Atlanta. He does the same thing. He has to call his cousins. I say okay, and I walk to the back of the trailer, and I watch him go around a corner at the back of the building. Then I take off running. But he's not there. Just a wall. Why would he go over the wall? I stand there and think for a while, and then give up. I'm walking back to the truck, and there's a screen door into the kitchen. Right inside the door is Jimmy, sitting at a small table. I could not believe I was so dumb. It dawns on me. He can't eat up front. I open the screen door and go in and sit down. I say to him, "Up in New York, you take no crap from anybody. I just realized you can't eat up front." "That's right, and when you're in Rome, do what the Romans do. And you can't be in here either. You get out before we get our tires slashed on the truck." We left there. It was Friday. We felt that we had plenty of time. We started to panic at 3:30 p.m. We did not want to be stuck in Atlanta until Monday. That's what's called a layover. 20 minutes later, we find the place. They give us a very hard time, telling us that we should have been there earlier. It's too much paperwork. I say the New York office told us the papers would be all ready. They give us all the papers and 2-foot by 2-foot cardboard signs that say Rocky Ford. They become very nice to me, and they explain that the signs must be taped to each door before we get to Texas. We were so excited to be getting out of Atlanta, I put the signs behind my seat. 3 days later, I pulled onto the scales in New Mexico at 3:45 p.m. I handed the guy the papers, and he studied them. He said, "You're not Rocky Ford." I said, "Oh man, I've got the signs behind my seat." "No good," he says. "Pull your rig over there, park it, lock it, and come with me." When I get scared, I start talking. We go inside and there's 4 other border guards writing up other truckers. I'm still trying to talk myself out of the charges. One of the Mexican guards, who was writing up another trucker, hears my voice and stops writing. He looks straight at me and asks me where I'm from. "Ireland," I say. He says to the guy who brought me into the back, "Do you mind switching with me?" His friend says, "No problem." This little Mexican says to me, "Where in Ireland?" I say, "Leitrim." And he says, "My mother is from Killybegs in Donegal, Ireland. Do you know it?" "Yes," I say. As a kid, we used to go on bus tours to Killybegs. He says that I had forgotten to display my signs. Let me get the proper tape. We'll make you legal and send you on your way. My mother will be happy that I met an Irishman who was in her town. You were very lucky, he says. Another 10 to 15 minutes and I would have been off duty and your fine would have been $500. We got to Los Angeles. It took 5 days to unload, a day for each family. Then you call New York. They tell you where to pick up and where it's going. You find yourself going from state to state. The whole idea is not to travel empty. It's September and we're in Fargo, North Dakota. The warehouse guy said, "We have 8,000 pounds going to Baton Rouge, Louisiana." Jimmy said, "We'll take that." We picked up another 5,000 pounds in St. Louis for Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Jimmy said, "Now we're on our way to New York." We left Baton Rouge early Friday morning. Jimmy said we shouldn't have any problem getting to Fort Bragg by 4 p.m. We hit traffic, and Jimmy was getting very uneasy. He said, "We've got to get there. We can't have a layover until Monday." We were so close. They were just closing the gates. Now we're stuck until Monday. We stayed in the 401 truck stop, and that's when I found out why Jimmy didn't want to be stuck in Bragg, North Carolina. There were signs up in the truck stop. Restaurants, whites only. TV room, whites only. Beds, whites only. And while I ate in the restaurant, watched TV, and slept in a bed, Jimmy ate in the kitchen, slept in the truck with no air conditioning, and listened to the radio. Jimmy was 5 generations American, and I was a foreigner. There's something wrong with this freedom for all in America. In the moving business, they have everything in cardboard, even wardrobes. When we packed the trailer, Jimmy put in a wardrobe for the both of us. He would hang his suits, shirts, and ties and put his shoes in the bottom. "Come on, man," he said to me. "You've got to have a suit and a blazer and some nice pants. When we're stuck in those towns from Friday evening to Monday morning, we have to make the best of it, baby." One time, we were on our way back from California to Fort Worth, Texas. We stopped off in El Paso. We met an old-time trucker who told us, "If you're going over the border to Juarez, Mexico, don't drive. The cops there will lock you up on a bogus charge, and when you come out, you'll have no truck." So we parked our truck and walked over. We bought some things. Jimmy bought 2 small half-ounce bottles of something he called sex juice. The following Sunday, we were in Fort Worth. Jimmy found out about a roadside gathering, and we went. There were a lot of people, food, music, tables. It reminded me of when I was a kid. We used to have crossroad dancing music on a flatbed truck, and you danced on the road. The big problem was if you danced a lot, you had no soles on your shoes. But the people in Fort Worth were smarter. They weren't dancing. Everybody was very friendly. Jimmy saw this beautiful tall girl and moved in. Everything was going great. He was talking to her for an hour. She had her hands around him and she was kissing him. This big, good-looking guy showed up and she introduced him to Jimmy. Then he wanted to talk to her. She turned to Jimmy and said, "I'll be back." Jimmy comes talking to me. It's me she wants. She's coming back. I'll give her a drop of the sex juice. She did come back, and Jimmy put a drop in her drink. It took about 5 minutes. She jumped up, ran to the other guy, jumped on him with her legs around his waist, telling him, "Let's get out of here." He had a big smile on his face, carrying her away. I said to Jimmy, "There goes a guy who wants to thank you, but he doesn't know who you are." I was accepted better in most cases by blacks than Jimmy was by whites, or I thought I was. We were in Selma, Alabama for a weekend. George Wallace, the governor, was getting so much attention with his speeches. Segregation yesterday, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. The world media was giving him daily attention. Jimmy was smart. He said people were not traveling. The top-shelf motels were not much more expensive than the cheap motels, and we had a better chance in the class places than in a cheap white trash motel. Let's give it a shot. We left the trailer at the moving company dock and drove the tractor right up to the front door. Both of us got out. There was a young black doorman. Jimmy went first. He wouldn't open the door for Jimmy. Jimmy opened it and walked in. I was next, and he opened it for me. Up at the desk, Jimmy said, "We need a room with 2 beds for 3 nights." I think she was more shocked than anything else. Jimmy asked if breakfast came with that, and she said yes. Back then, everything was paid in cash. Jimmy said, "We will pay by the day." He told me later, "Never set yourself up. If we paid for 3 days, tomorrow she would tell us we owed. You've got to know how to handle Whitey." Then he went on about the whites. "They're so bad. They go to war with each other," and on and on and on. "But Jimmy," I said, "sure, I'm white." "No, man," he said, "you ain't white, you're Irish." The next day we went for breakfast and the black doorman gave Jimmy a dirty look. Jimmy took no notice and said to me, "He's an Uncle Tom." But I didn't know what that meant. He doesn't want any change. We got back to the room. Jimmy was laying on the bed and I was sitting in the chair when a young girl knocked on the open door and asked if we wanted our room cleaned. "Sure," said Jimmy, "come in." He talked to her about this and that and everything else. He had her laughing. He said, "Do you ever make a little extra money with the customers?" "If the timing is right." "Is the time right now?" asked Jimmy. "No, I'm behind schedule," she said. "Are you here tomorrow?" "Yes," said Jimmy. "Well, I'll get these rooms done fast and I'll see you tomorrow." That night, Jimmy called a cab and we went to a church dance. I was the only white guy there. I asked this girl to dance. She did, and when I got back to the table, Jimmy said, "It's a good thing this is a church social. You're going to get us killed." But everything went off fine. We went back to the motel. The next day, Jimmy met the maid. I went to the truck outside. A half-hour later, Jimmy called me in. The girl was in the bathroom. Jimmy called her out and said, "This Irish boy's shy," he said to me. "Look at this, young, beautiful, and good pussy." She said, "Come on, baby, he's right on all 3. She wanted to put me at ease. Jimmy left the room. The next time we went from New York to Florida, Goldstein told us, "I have a piano going to South Carolina. Here's the deal. I'll give you $75. You put it on the tailgate, but that'll make you 5 feet too long. There's a good possibility that you will get caught in Virginia. If you enter the state in the morning, the fine will be $22.50. You will still have the 50. So what do you say?" I said yes. As luck would have it, we crossed the state line into Virginia at 7 a.m. At 7:50 a.m., a state trooper going north makes a U-turn. Jimmy says, "Don't piss him off. Pull over." "Good morning, gentlemen. I think you're a little over length." "Yes, officer, I understand." The cop said, "We must make sure. You hold the end of this tape and I'll go the length of it." Off he went the full length of the tape. "You, come here." "Yes, sir." "You see that says 50 feet? Now you hold the tape here and we will measure the rest." Then he said, "Come here. Look, you're 5 feet over length." "Yes, sir." "Lock your truck and get in the patrol car. We'll all go to see the justice of the peace." We drove back north about 5 miles, made a left turn onto a dirt road, went another 2 miles onto another lane, and went another quarter of a mile and finished up at the side of a house. I was loving this. It was more backwards than Leitrim. He got out and told us to get out. A woman came out the back door. "Good morning, Bill." "Good morning, Mary Lou. Is Mason around?" "He's down in the field feeding the calves." "That's what I had to do before I went to school back in Ireland." She said, "You all come on in, I got the coffee on." The back room we were in looked like an office. It had a coat rack with 3 coats hanging on it. The office had 2 large windows. We were all chatting away when, 15 minutes later, Mason arrived with 5 empty buckets, which he dropped into each other. He had a farmer's overcoat on. He walked in and said, "Good morning, Bill," as he was taking off his coat. "Good morning, Mason." "How was the fishing yesterday, Bill?" he asked as he put on a robe that was hanging on the rack. "Caught a few nice ones." "Good, good. A nice relaxing day." "What have you got here, Bill?" "These gentlemen had the tailgate down, which leaves them 5 feet too long." "Which of you gentlemen was driving?" I put up my hand. "You sit here." He took a plaque, turned it towards me. It said Justice of the Peace, and he started writing. Nobody said a word while he was writing. "Okay," he said, $22.50. I wanted to see his reaction, so I said, "Is there any way I could beat this ticket?" "Well," he said, "we can lock you up in our jail. There's a judge coming through here in 3 weeks. "And what would it cost me then?" I said. $22.50. I paid. We got back in the car. He drove us to the truck and told us we must be out of the state by midnight or we could get another ticket. We got to South Carolina, got no more tickets, and got our $50. Strange incident, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. It was a real Andy Griffith Mayberry experience. We delivered the piano to a poor black family. Their son worked for the post office in New York and had saved his money to buy the piano for his little sister. I wish I had kept her name. I often wondered if she became famous. When the mother saw us taking the heavy furniture pads off the piano, she said, My, they would make great blankets when we're cold." Their house was just a shack. When we gave them 4 furniture pads, she hugged us. As we drove away, Jimmy said, "You're the first white boy that black mama ever hugged." Our next stop was Tampa. We arrived late Saturday night. Jimmy said, "I know Tampa. I lived here." We checked into a motel in the black section of town. Jimmy was always ready to party. I said that I was staying in and that I was tired. "Okay," said Jimmy. "I'll see you later." I went to bed and I didn't wake up until the next afternoon. I heard the key in the door. Jimmy walked in with a tall black girl. He said to her, "There he is, baby." He said to me, "Wake up, man. You don't wake up to this every day. This is Bon Qui Qui." She said, "Hello, honey baby. Jimmy's told me all about you. Jimmy says this is what you should wake up to every day." He says to me, "Bon Qui Qui is my friend. Everything is taken care of, Stoney. I'll see you all later," and leaves. She says, "Jimmy is my friend. Why do you look so nervous?" Then she says, "But I can see why you're nervous, sticking it into a strange little black hole. But wait until I'm finished. You'll be happy you met me. I promised Jimmy I'd make you happy. Relax, baby, I'll teach you how to enjoy." I did relax, and I had a great time. I said to her, "You have an unusual name. Does it stand for anything?" "Yes," she said. "In French, it means your steak is ready." For a young Irish guy in America, I was getting some education. Like about how black people can keep the bad treatment hidden, work so very hard, and still enjoy life. I didn't trust myself to remember her name, so I called her Frenchie when I said goodbye. The following morning, we started unloading at a private house. By 3 p.m., we were on our way to Miami. When we got to Miami, Jimmy knew a black lady who had worked in the Allstate Van Lines office in New York. She had gone back to her hometown and her friends and had bought a rooming house on 2nd Avenue, the Harlem of Miami. We got in there very late, 11 p.m. Everybody was standing around on every corner watching this big tractor trailer with all the lights. Jimmy said, "Let me go in and talk to her." While Jimmy was gone, guys were coming all around the truck asking me if we were unloading that night. I said, "No, tomorrow morning." Jimmy finally came back, climbed up into the truck, and closed the door. He said, "Let me explain. I'm sure you'll understand. She's got rooms. I'm going to stay because she needs the money, but she wanted me to explain to you that if she rented a room to a white guy, they would burn her house down." "Jimmy, I understand very well. I will drive into Miami and I'll see you here at 7 a.m. I get there the next morning at 6:45 a.m., and Jimmy is outside waiting with some guys hanging around him. He told me, "This is the way moving furniture works. There's always guys in every town watching for furniture trucks. Most of the time they're good movers. We needed 2. I picked these 2. Because we had unloaded a family in Tampa, we had room in the back of the trailer. We put them in the back and went to unload. They were so good we kept them for the next 2 days we were there. When we had the trailer empty, we called New York to find out where we were to go next. They told us to go to the Garrison Army Base in Miami to pick up a family's furniture. He's some kind of general. His furniture has been in storage for months while they were looking for a house off the base in Fort Gordon, Georgia. When we got to Fort Gordon, we were directed to his house. He was there with his wife. He was acting like a general, walking up and down, checking everything with his hands clasped behind his back. We had most of the furniture in, and Jimmy and I were putting legs on a table. We were talking to each other, and the general heard my accent. Suddenly, he stopped, almost on top of me. "Excuse me," he said. "Is that an Irish accent?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "This is very important to me. Are you from the north or the south of Ireland?" "I'm from the south, sir." He took his wife by the hand. "Honey, let's get out of here." Jimmy asked what that was all about, and I said to Jimmy, "I think I know. That man is Protestant. He may be 4 or 5 generations removed from Belfast, but because I'm from the south, he's thinking I'm Catholic. The poor man has so much hate that he can't stand to look at me." "First time I've seen that," said Jimmy. "If we were in a dark alley with him, I'd have a better chance at surviving than you." When we finished, we said we needed to be signed out. He must have really hated me, because he sent a soldier to sign us out. If he only knew the way I felt. We called New York and got bad news. No jobs coming back to New York. The good news was that there was another full load with families going south, one family going to outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. We spent a few days in New York for loading. We were in Brooklyn getting the last family on, and it got late. I wouldn't be able to get the paperwork into the office until the next day. Jimmy said he knew clubs in Brooklyn. He gave me the address and the number of a room he had rented on 54th Street between 8th and 9th Avenues. He told me to pick him up when I got the papers, and we'd go through the Lincoln Tunnel. The next morning, I got there and double-parked. I saw a cop on the corner. I ran up to the door and rang the bell. Jimmy opened the door. "Come in," he said. "Grab this bag." Then he said, "Look in the bed." I guess he wanted me to see that there was a 25 or 30-year-old white girl asleep in the bed. I said, "I'll see you downstairs," and I took his bag. I was sitting behind the steering wheel when he opened the door and threw in a bag and then a pearl-handled gun. "Put that in the glove compartment." And he walked back to the side door where he had his wardrobe and hung his suits and shirts. He came back, climbed into the truck, and said, "Let's go." "But the gun. See the cop? He's directing traffic, man. Let's go." "But Jimmy, what if we get stopped? I'm nervous." "Don't be. I've always had a gun. You just didn't see it." I was relieved when we were on the Jersey Turnpike going south. The next night, we got into Fayetteville. Jimmy says, "You know, this is a black family's private house. If we can find it, we can get unloaded." We were in the country and black dark. There were no streetlights. We came to a crossroads and there was a grocery store. Jimmy said, "Let's go in here. Somebody might know." He must have had a reason for asking me to go in. I was behind him. He said, "Good evening, ma'am." I stood back with my back to the wall. "We're looking for a Johnson family out here in this part of the country." As he walked down toward her, she said, "I don't know any Johnsons." She walked towards me inside the counter. Jimmy saw a phone and said, "Ma'am, I'll leave the dime. Can I use the phone?" "No," she said. Jimmy said, "Thank you, ma'am," and he walks towards the door. I must have had a look on my face because I was having a flashback. When I was a kid and strangers would come into the shop looking for a family, mother or father would send me or my sisters with them so they wouldn't get lost. The woman was looking at me, and I was looking at her with my mouth open in disbelief. Before Jimmy got to the door, she said, "Use the phone. Leave a dime." "Thank you, ma'am." And he used the phone, but nobody answered. We went outside and sat in the truck. The truck stood out in the dark country night, 50 feet long with all those lights. A car pulled up with 6 guys in it. The driver got out and spoke to Jimmy. He told Jimmy that he knows the family, and he told us to follow him. "You're my man," says Jimmy. I followed the car for a few miles. He was way ahead of us. We see the lights turn left. We got up to where they turned when Jimmy said, "Stop." "Okay," said Jimmy. "Just turn enough for the lights to shine up that road. Those guys might be bringing us up a road where the truck will sink." Jimmy got out onto the dirt road. It didn't look good. He walked up one side, down the other side, and then the middle, and decided that we would go. As we drove along, very slowly, we saw a light away over in a field. Then we saw a second light. I said to Jimmy, "Do you know what that second light is?" "No," he said. I told him that from living in the country, I knew it was a window light. When they opened the door, the second light appeared. When we got there, the 6 guys were outside the car. We climbed down and they surrounded us, but you couldn't see who was who. Then I heard a guy saying, "You're from New York! You must have money!" I heard Jimmy saying, "Yeah, man, we have money!" And then there's a shot, and then another shot. Everybody started running. I dove under the trailer. There were 3 or 4 more shots. Then everything went quiet. I came out. Everyone was gone except Jimmy. I said, "That was you?" "Yes, sir. When he mentioned money, I wanted him to know that I had a gun to go along with it." The people from the house were standing in the field. Jimmy yelled to them, telling them he was from the moving company and that it was okay. They came over. Then the guy came back to get his car and apologized for what happened. He said that he didn't know any of those guys. Jimmy didn't believe him, but used this opportunity to send this guy a message. He told the owner of the house, making sure the guy with the car could hear him, "When our trucks leave the dock, the foreman puts a government seal on with a special tool." He brought them around the whole trailer, showing them the government seal and telling them that the seal can't be broken until 9 a.m. on the next day's date. "If it's tampered with, you all will be dealing with the FBI and not the local cops." Then he said to me, "Let's unhook the trailer. We'll take the cab into Fayetteville." I said to him, "Do you think that line will work?" He said, "Those people don't like to hear FBI. It'll work." We drove to Fayetteville. The only place we could stay was the 401 truck stop, me in a bed and Jimmy in the truck. The next morning, we drove out to the house, and Jimmy was right. Nothing had been touched. We were there most of the day. The house was 400 yards up the field. It was on stilts, and I could see cats through the floorboards. It must have been cold in the winter. We got on the road by late afternoon. I'm thinking that if we're making deliveries at night in the South, maybe I should get a gun. Jimmy said it's easy in Miami. The next day, the truck broke down outside of Macon, Georgia. Jimmy says if we can get it going, he knows a place in Macon where we can get it fixed. We worked on cleaning out the diesel lines, and after an hour, it kicked over. We started driving, but it wouldn't go over 20 miles an hour. When we made it into town, it was 80 degrees out. As we drove in, I was looking at all those black people, young and old, standing on corners outside the stores. There must have been 15 to 20 on each corner. In the middle of the town, Jimmy said there was a driveway to the left. It was narrow. You had to go out as far as you could to the right and make a very wide turn, otherwise you'd crash into a building. When we got down the driveway, we came to what looked like a big field with a big truck mechanic's shop. 5 white guys came out. They looked at the truck and saw the New York plates. They stared at the both of us. "You all from New York? What's wrong?" Jimmy said, "We couldn't get it to go over 20 miles an hour. We got dirty diesel." "The lines need to be purged. Back it away down and unhook the trailer." So I did. The civil rights marches were going strong. Blacks were doing their job actions, which meant they go to work, but work very slowly. On June 22, 1964, 3 civil rights kids, 1 black and 2 white, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, were murdered by the sheriff and his deputies in a town called Philadelphia, Mississippi. A song that was very popular at that time was "Eve of Destruction" by Barry McGuire. Have a listen on YouTube. I was still naive about what was going on around me. It being 80 degrees, I figured it would take at least 2 hours to fix it. I said, "Where can we get some beer?" A guy said, "This is a dry town, but if you want some beer, I'll drive you all out the road to the next county." I said, "Great, I'll get beer for everybody. Come on, Jimmy." Jimmy made a sign to me and said, "Let me show you something." And he walked all the way down the field to the back of the trailer. He said, "You dumb Irishman! You're dumber than the dumbest black folk. You go get the beer. I'll stay with the truck and watch them so they don't put a pound of sugar in the tanks, or we'll never get out of Georgia. I was still carefree. I said to the other guy, let's go get the beer. On the way out the road, he was friendly. You all from New York? Yep, I said. We arrived at this store out in the countryside, and he drove up to the door. We both got out, and he held the door, so I walked in, him behind me. I heard the door close. When I looked back, his demeanor had completely changed. He said, Hello, Jesse. Hello, Billy Joe. You know what I got here? I got myself a New York boy, and he's riding with a black man. I'm looking straight ahead at this guy, Jesse, and I see a double-barreled shotgun hanging over the register. I think of the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi. When I get nervous, I talk a lot, and the first words out of my mouth are, Listen, gentlemen, I'm here only a few months from Ireland, and I'm only a driver. I know nothing about this country. If the boss puts a black man with me, I do what I'm told. What do you think, Jesse? I think he really doesn't know, Billy Joe. Jesse said, You know what you do, boy? When you get back up to New York, you tell your Jew boss how we feel about black folk down here. I didn't know how he figured, but my boss was Jewish. Yes, sir, I sure will let him know how you feel about black folk. He said, How much beer do you want? Give me 2 6-packs. We got outside and into the car. You're new in this country? Yes, sir. You're getting to know how we feel about black folk down here? Yes, sir. When we got back, the truck was fixed. Jimmy had paid and he had it hooked back up to the trailer. Jimmy said, Let me drive it out of here. I think he wanted them to see that he was the man. I left the beer for those white bastards. I said to Jimmy, No, you can't drive it. I'm a nervous wreck. I've got to drive. I drove out, made this big, wide turn, had to go 2 blocks around a circle and onto the main road. When I got on the main road and started to breathe normally, I finally opened my mouth. Jimmy, I said, I just gave you up. And I told him everything I had said. No more black folk with me down south. Jimmy looked at me. That's all right. If I was in your predicament, I'd have given me up too. From that day forward, I was never from New York. I found out that a southern accent was easy, and I picked a town to be from. Rocky Mountain, North Carolina. One day, we drove into the cross-the-border truck stop in Jacksonville, Florida. The whole front was glass. When you sat in the restaurant, you could see your truck outside. While you were waiting for your food, the waitress kept filling your coffee cup. Jimmy walked around the back to eat in the kitchen. I went in front, sat down. The waitress came over, poured coffee. How you all doing? What you all having? I'll have a tuna fish on rye, thank you. 10 minutes go by and no tuna. More coffee. Where you all from? Rocky Mountain, North Carolina. My, there's more truckers from North Carolina than from any other state. You all must get cheap insurance up there. I looked out the window and saw Jimmy heading back to the truck after eating. We had been told that Martin Luther King Jr. had a big march going on somewhere. Any blacks that couldn't go were doing their job actions. The waitress came around with more coffee. She said, Now don't you worry, your food is coming. You know, she said, since this King guy started up, they're getting slower and slower back there. I'd hear a lot of stuff like that. Then I'd go back to the truck and Jimmy and I would have some good laughs. Back then, it was so interesting. Some of the southern white truck stop and restaurant owners thought that if they built a restaurant in the back, identical to the one up front, blacks would be happy to stay segregated. Some truck stop owners knocked down the front and the back and put the kitchen in the middle. 2 identical restaurants, one in the back and one in the front. They would say, What more do they want? Handcuffed and homeless. We were in the office in New York one Saturday morning and loaded for Los Angeles, California. Jimmy gets a call telling him that his mother is very ill and he has to go down south. He tells me, You will have to do this run on your own. I drive on my own for 6 days. On my way back, I break down 25 miles outside of El Paso, late on a Saturday night. Nothing I can do until the next day, so I sleep with the truck running to keep warm. I don't wake until 10 a.m. next day. I cross over the highway and get a ride with a trucker. Luck is with me. His company works out of El Paso, and he says there is a mechanic who works on their trucks would be glad to drive out to help me get back on the road, even on a Sunday, for a price. How lucky can I get? By the time we get to El Paso and he drives me to the mechanic's shop, it's raining. I tell the mechanic my story and he says no problem, but with rain we don't want to be run over, so he calls the sheriff's office. They send a deputy over and he escorts the mechanic and me out the 25 miles. He got me back on the road at 7 p.m. that Sunday evening. The deputy says to me, "That'll take a little of your overhead." I am back on the road and I am so happy. How could I be so lucky to get a mechanic on a Sunday? I drive about 10 miles and see a sign for diesel. With the truck running all night, I was low on diesel. As I drive in, I see a cop car. The station was a run-down shack. It had diesel and that was all. The place did not get too many trucks stopping, and the guy looked happy to see me, with a big hello. I told him to fill it up, which would be a lot of money for him. Since it was raining, I went into the shack. The only one there is a cop, and he had with him a skinny, dirty old man in handcuffs. I ask the cop, what did he do? The cop says he is a vagrant. I ask, what is a vagrant? He says when he stops a person, he must have $2 in his pocket, or he gets locked up. The old guy was a sad-looking sight, standing there all wet and not a word coming out of his mouth. I say to the cop, "Can I take him?" "Sure," says the cop, "as long as he is not in my town," and he takes the cuffs off him. I felt sorry for the guy. He looked so skinny and wet that he looked like a drowned rat. He seemed very stiff for a man in his 40s. The truck cab is very high up, and I had to push him up into it. When I paid the guy who pumped the diesel, he had a big smile for me, and he told me in a low voice that this was a very nice thing I was doing. I think he did not want the cop to hear him. I drove all night, and he slept on the seat. I did not suggest that he sleep in the sleeper, since he was dirty, and he did smell a little. By the time daylight had come, we were getting close to Dallas. He pointed to the countryside to my left and told me that when he is in this part of the country and has no money, he picks cotton on a cotton farm. I asked him how much he gets paid. He says $8 for 100 pounds weight, and it takes 16 hours to do that. But, he said, black people could do it in 12. I said to him, "You're like a hobo, but they know how to look after themselves. Why do you look so dirty?" He said, "I don't think I am that smart." I laughed because I did not think you needed much brains to be a hobo. I asked if he knew about the big truck stops and how to wash up. He said no, he did not. I told him he's definitely not a hobo. I couldn't believe I was giving him tricks on how to keep clean. Just before we came to Dallas, we saw a big truck stop. Big truck stops have everything: diesel, food, clothes, and showers for truckers. I told him I was going to buy him a new shirt, pants, socks, and a razor blade to shave with. I said, "I will give you $0.25. Inside the door is a small room. Just watch me. I will put down my 25 cents and the girl will give me a small bar of soap and a towel. You do the same and then we go to the showers." I was showered and shaved and waiting outside for him. It took him forever to come out. When he did, he looked pretty good and younger. I asked him if he had ever heard of the truck stop showers before. "No," he said. "Well," I said, "you don't have to be dirty anymore." We went back to the counter and I bought us breakfast. When we went outside, he asked if it would be okay if he stayed around here for a while. "Okay," I said, "but you have no money." So I gave him $5, and he said, "I have to thank God for all this help." I said, "Fuck God, what about me?" And we parted ways. I never did ask him his name, and he never asked me mine. I would go back to cab driving from December to March. Jimmy sometimes would stay in Florida and sometimes stay local, moving. Then he and I would hook up again. We did that for 3 years. Then Jimmy gave it all up and went back to Florida. I got tired of furniture and got into freight. I liked it. You backed into a dock and they loaded it onto the trailer. I tied it down and drove away. One of my runs was from upstate New York to Lexington, Kentucky. One was from Rockford, Illinois to Springfield, Massachusetts. I recall the first time I got to Rockford. I parked away from the dock and got woke up at 3 a.m. by a trucker from the same company, Dairy Express. He said to park at the dock so you get away first thing in the morning. The doors opened, and sure enough, there were 12 trucks waiting behind us. I was picking up bulldozers and street diggers for Springfield, Massachusetts. The guy that drove the equipment onto my trailer had an accent. I said, "Where is your accent from?" "County Cork." "My, you're a long way from home." "So are you." I got into Springfield at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, and I could not find the address to drop off the load. I'm in the town, and I see a cop car. I pulled in behind him, and I get out and go up to him. He says, "Sit in the car, and I'll help you out." I sit in the front seat with him. He says, "You're Irish?" "Yep." He says, "There used to be a lot of Irish in Springfield. Still are. When I was a kid, my father would take me with him, making deliveries to all the bars. I got to know all the Irish bar owners. They became my friends. Every one of them died from cirrhosis of the liver. Do we ever have a drinking problem?" He said, "Follow me, and I'll take you where you have to go." He got me there, and I said goodbye and thanks. Then I went to sleep. The next morning, a worker banged on the door. He told me where to back in. This guy was talking to his boss, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, "Where are you from?" "County Cork." I said, "You may find this hard to believe, but the guy that drove this equipment on in Rockford, Illinois was from County Cork." Winter came again, and I went back to driving a cab.